our argument was very specific and unique to Norfolk Southern because of those very clear climate risks and the very clear opportunities towards a lower carbon future as a lower emitting transport source.
Thank you very much, Jeff, for your time today. First of all, let me ask you about your campaign to leverage giant Norfolk Southern Corporation. You handed a proposal to disclose political spending on them. What did you spot the focus on this resolution towards the big company?
Sure. So first off, I would say that, and I think you know this, we're members of the Interfaith Center on Corporate Responsibility. Friends Fiduciary is a faith-based, socially responsible investment group working to represent Quaker values, so the values of our constituent investors in our investment process. And to do that, we do both screening, exclusionary screening, as well as positive screening of companies into the portfolio. We also have a robust shareholder engagement program, and this NSC or Norfolk Southern engagement falls under that broader shareholder advocacy effort that Friends Fiduciary does. And we engage in shareholder advocacy to reflect our values. So we believe that shareholders have rights and responsibilities for the companies that they invest in. And so shareholder engagement is part of that shareholder responsibility that we feel we have. So we identify companies where we have a concern about the policies or practices. And that's how we determine the companies to work on. And we do that typically in conjunction with other faith-based and socially responsible investors, working through coalitions like the Interfaith Center and others. So on the Norfolk Southern engagement, this was a newer strategy. And it really reflects the urgency that investors have around the climate crisis. So that's an increasing sense of urgency that our group has, and I think is becoming more broadly shared around the world with shareholders and certainly society at large. The other kind of converging factor here is that because of the systemic nature of climate change and its worldwide impact, it really points to the importance of policy, both at individual country levels, like in the US, but also broader collaboration and agreement internationally to address this international concern of climate risk and the extreme climate events that we're increasingly feeling. So that's why we targeted lobbying, if you will. Lobbying in and of itself is not bad. We realize that's a legitimate business activity. However, Quakers, stemming from our values, we believe that integrity is important. And so if a company is saying something publicly, then their lobbying through a trade association or other group should not be working counter to that public position. And that's kind of the crux of the Norfolk Southern resolution. So the resolution itself asked the company to prepare a report on any whether their direct and indirect lobbying spend was aligned with the Paris Climate Agreement, believing that in order for us as a society, a global society, to survive, we need to keep global warming below 1.5 degrees. And that's why we picked the Paris Climate Agreement from a misalignment benchmark, if you will. So the ask was essentially to have the companies assess their lobbying spend through both if they do direct lobbying, most of NSC's or Norfolk Southern's was through the trade associations. And some of those trade associations, like the American Association of Railroads, was known as a climate denier, if you will. And Norfolk Southern supported that trade association through its membership and payments to them. So we felt that there was a disconnect there and a misalignment. The other kind of key piece, I think, here is that from a governance perspective, increasingly investors are seeing that climate risk, because of its systemic nature, really requires board oversight of the issues around that. So increasingly investors are asking for members to join the board who have climate experience and expertise in order to help companies negotiate the climate risks and opportunities. And also part of the Norfolk Southern argument was that the board oversight responsibilities were not clear around their lobbying spend. So those were kind of the issues that we wanted to raise with this proposal. I guess the other thing I would say, and I may be hitting everything at once here, is that Norfolk Southern, we believe rail companies have particular risks and particular opportunities by working to mitigate climate change. The risks certainly are to their infrastructure and operations. You know, rail's infrastructure can be damaged by extreme weather events. Their operations can be disrupted by extreme weather events. So those risks are very clear. And on the opportunity side, the opportunity set is that rail transit produces less greenhouse gas emissions than truck transit, truck transport at this point. It's a more efficient way of transportation from a greenhouse gas perspective. And so they have a natural advantage. And one of the challenges was that a good portion of their freight, we believe it was up to 50% in 2010 of Norfolk Southern's revenue, freight revenue, was hauling coal. Well, that is problematic from a climate change perspective. And while that's dropped significantly to the 13 to 15% range more recently, their trade associations were still lobbying to essentially downplay climate risk and support the continued expansion of coal, so that rail operations could continue to haul that freight.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. The American railway companies mainly traditionally have gotten the benefit from the cargo transportation. And it's different from Japan because we are such a small country. Then railway companies get a revenue from a bread train, Shinkansen, or the transportation of people. My question is, how did the other institutional investors understood the need of the change, brought by your shareholder resolution? I mean, they need to protect their benefit structure, but they also need to transform, in this urgency of the climate change. Could you tell me how you persuaded the other institutional investors?
Yeah, well, as you know, we got a 76.4% vote which we were very pleased with. And that to us represented broad institutional support. You don't reach that level without strong institutional investor support. As you may know, excuse me, the two proxy voting services, institutional proxy voting services, excuse me, ISS and Glass Lewis both recommended for the proposal. And I think there were a couple of factors there. One, and we typically do this when we're lead on a shareholder resolution, we work to prepare an exempt solicitation, which is a letter to shareholders, really stating our case as to why we thought this deserves shareholder support. I think that letter to shareholders was very effective. It focused on the issues. It pointed out that management's response to the proposal kind of missed the boat, if you will. This proposal was specifically around lobbying expense and alignment with the Paris Agreement. And the company's arguments were really based on, we're a very sustainable company, and we have a very high rating from the Center for Political Accountability, which produces a Zicklin index around transparency and accountability for political spending. So not for lobbying. It wasn't really appropriate for this particular proposal. So I think in some ways the company's arguments missed the point of this proposal. And we were very clear about that in our letter to shareholders. And I think clearly the shareholders agreed with our position that the issues we raised were not being addressed by the company. The other thing I would say is that we did do a fair bit of work to try and educate other institutional investors. We actually reached out, I know it was over 20 of the largest shareholders of Norfolk Southern to explain the proposal, explain the issues, and explain our concerns. And we had one large institutional shareholder actually contact us prior to their vote to better understand our conversations with the company and to clarify the concerns that we were seeing, some of which they shared and wanted to get a better understanding of. So I think all those factors helped move this forward. And I think that our argument was very specific and unique to Norfolk Southern because of those very clear climate risks and the very clear opportunities towards a lower carbon future as a lower emitting transport source.
Thank you very much. After the, you getting a majority vote, how's conversation between NSC and you? Could you give us some updates if you are able to?
So as is typical certainly after a majority vote, but we do this after with any company after a shareholder resolution, we reach out to the company to talk about, okay, here was the vote. Here again are concerns. Do you have any questions? And we did. We had a meeting in July with management from Norfolk Southern. We actually reached out to the company to get that conversation started. Our expectation is that there will be that the company will produce some type of report. As I said, we had an initial meeting. We provided the company with resources on examples of other companies that have done these alignment audits of their lobbying spend, and then disclose that and reported it publicly to shareholders. So we sent them good examples, most of which are still at this point on European-based companies. The U.S. is still US companies are still finding their way to this new investor ask. And, you know, legitimately, it is a new ask to the companies. A very important one. The fact that it's new doesn't mean it isn't important. It's an evolution of where we need to go on addressing climate change and the risks it presents to shareholders and society writ large. The other thing that I would note here is that we're long-term investors. And we saw the trade associations lobbying for coal as being a very short-term approach. We know over the long term, we need to move to a lower carbon future. And even from a shareholder perspective for a rail company, we want to see them investing in the future, not relying on the past in terms of their revenue generation. Because we know, as I noted, coal haulage has dropped considerably. We would expect that to continue. And it's unfortunate if the lobbying that's being done isn't in alignment with, one, that business reality, and two, the company's positioning itself as a more sustainable freight option. The risk of climate change, catastrophic climate change. And I think increasingly investors are aware of that, and even company CEOs are aware of that. In conversations I've had with company CEOs, none of them dispute the challenge that climate risk presents to their business.